Rise! Rising revolution! Rise! Rising revolution! Everybody, one for all! Sound off! This is the call! Rise! Like we're alive! Tonight we rise! Make a better life! Tonight we rise! 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 Rising revolution! Rise!
Hey guys, nothing important here, and today we are going over how to scale fiction. The reason why I'm doing this video today is because I keep getting these same set of questions in the comment section, like, how strong is this guy? How strong is that guy? How can I scale this guy? Or how can I scale that guy? And I thought, well, I keep getting all these questions in the comment section, so I decided, well, if those people in particular want to know how to scale or want to know how strong someone is, they can be referred to this video so that they can learn how to determine that for themselves. So, because like I don't scale every person on the planet, right? I'm not the best guy at Marvel or DC. So, anyway, so before we go over this list, note a couple things here. So, one, this list is not in any particular order. This is just telling you that this is what we're going to be going over in the video. This isn't in any order, but this is just to like remind you that, okay, we're going over this or this part of the video, or like I'll say we'll be going over this part, and then everything else for the video you clearly see I'll be going over later, or I've already went over it. So anyway, so moving on to the video though. So let's start off with the order of evidence. Well, what do I mean by the order of evidence? Well, to scale fiction, there is an order of evidence that's in place, right? And that in that particular order, it is this, right? There's the entire verse in its entirety. Like, for example, Naruto, right? Okay, in Naruto, you have to go by what the narrative tells you, right? And in Naruto, this character is a particular strength, or is a particular speed, or has that ability, right? And that's what the narrative is telling you, right? Then after that, you move on to feats. And then after that, you move on to statements. And then after that, you move on to information that is outside of the narrative or outside of Naruto, like, say, the guidebooks, or say maybe something Kishimoto said, right? And the reason as to why we do narrative context about feats or statements is because narrative context provided gives information about the feat or the statement. Or like, say, like, narrative context will tell you that this guy is not credible for that statement that they made, or this guy is credible in saying that this dude performed this type of feat. Like, overall, the narrative supports the lore. The lore provided tells you more about feats and statements in general. So just make sure to like keep the narrative context about feats and statements. Now, moving on to feats and statements though. On a one-to-one basis, feats beat statements every time. However, if you have a consistent amount of statements, with it being 2 or more, depending on how you go about that consistency, I generally go with 3 to be the safest. You can have statements over feats if there's enough lore to override the feats. However, do not undermine feats, because they can either be low ends, high ends, or they can be the consistent ends with statements that may support them, say being a bit stronger, or say this feat on this level is considered to be a higher level because in the verse, that particular level may be a lot higher than what the statements say described it to be, right? Like, for example, in DC, light speed or infinite speed, that's immeasurable speed, right? Like, you have characters like, say, Flash, going through the Speed Force, they're said to be moving at light speeds, right? Well, they're traveling through time with raw speed to like different parts of the multiverse or different points in time, and that's considered light speed, right? So like different verses will have different outtakes on the narrative context, and it'll have a different outtake on the feats and statements. So make sure to watch heavily on the narrative context for the feats and statements, and also make sure to keep in mind what type of feats or what type of statements you're dealing with. Because while it may not necessarily be a 1-to-1 every time, or a 10-to-10, some feats could be low ends or high ends, or some feats could contradict the narrative. Like, it generally just depends on how the verse works, so that's generally up to you. So, but moving on to author statements and guidebooks. So, author statements and guidebooks automatically they're out of the verse. That is secondary information. They will either support the narrative so you can use them, or they will contradict the narrative so you can't use them. For example, if Kishimoto said something about how like Naruto is only wall level or is only say mountain level, that would be contradicted by the fact that Naruto has feats and also statements and guidebook statements that puts him at planetary or above, right? Like he scales above the Ten Tails, scales above Madara, scales above Hashirama, scales above Kurama, right? So this would mean that Kishimoto made a death of the author fallacy where his statement contradicted the narrative of the verse. Or this guidebook may commit a fallacy or may commit a contradiction. And so automatically we just wouldn't include those guidebooks to say author statements if they contradict the narrative or don't bring anything to the narrative, right? We generally only use author statements or guidebook statements or just guidebooks in general if they support the narrative, right? So keep that in mind. Now, moving on to verse versus verse. What I mean by this? Well, okay, so different verses will have different feats and different statements and how they go by those different feats and different statements. For example, verses like Marvel and DC have characters with an incredible amount of feats, like, say, Superman, right? In Post-Crisis, Superman is Universal Plus and Immeasurable Speed because he has so many Universal Plus and Immeasurable Speed feats. And that's not even taking into account statements or scaling or just narrative that the guidebooks will ever provide, right? So in Marvel and DC, that is definitely on a quantity basis. And also on a narrative quality basis as well. Like, for example, what's the context of this feat? What's the context of that feat? What statement provided supports this feat? Or what statement provided supports that feat, right? There's a lot that goes into Marvel and DC. So whenever you scale a character, you will have to need at least probably 10 to 20 scans at least. Because characters like God Emperor Doom, or say Galactus, or say, well, Iron Man, maybe Thor, or characters like, say, Doctor Strange, Superman, Ultraman, any character from like comics in general will have a lot of feats and a lot of statements, some that will be contradictory to others. So it's important to have the most consistency for those characters available. Because Marvel and DC have a consistency issue sometimes, where like this character will perform this level feat when they could be higher. Like, for example, in the recent comic book that came out for DC, Perpetua used all of her power to say, like, destroy the universe. When Perpetua has a lot of statements and scaling that put her above Universal, right? But she has that one anti feat that you have to explain as to why it would be a low end or just be an outlier, right? That stuff like that is common in Marvel and DC in general, so you have to be very aware about what you're talking about. And of course, author statements, they have to go by an editor, otherwise they're just completely invalid, because the editor is what makes everything canon, and the editor is what keeps everything in check, because you have different writers that will have different perspectives on this different character. So the editor takes every comic or like every issue that each one of the writers takes, and then we'll put them on a consistency basis, and we'll like edit them, make sure they don't contradict the other comics, and the editor will just do the best that they can to, keep everything in one. We'll keep everything in one place, right? So if there's a statement that an author makes on Twitter or whatever, do not even include that. That never even went by the editor. That's just saying what the author thinks about that character, about their version of the character. So keep that in mind. But moving on to debunks. Okay, so this is a bit of a heavy end. All right, so for debunks, whenever you want to debunk something, you need the proper evidence for the statement and the feat, or you need to show as to why their reasoning or someone's reasoning in general will be faulty. Because remember, you don't go by what that guy says, you go by what the narrative of the verse says, right? For example, in Dragon Ball, like, Cell will not have a power level of 35 billion, right? That could be true or false, but the point is, he doesn't have a quantifiable power level, he's just at that level, right? And also, speaking of power levels and debunks, this is a popular guy that we all know, makes a lot of mistakes, and is generally not someone who is rational about power levels. That's DBZ Maki. DBZ Mackie thinks you can give numbers to like every verse in general, even to characters who are outer-versal. Yes, outer-versal, right? Or infinite dimensional. Thinks you can give them numbers to see how strong they are, right? When that's wrong, right? And here's an example. He thinks that Cosmic Armor Superman, yes, the Thought Robot, yes, Plot Man, yes, him, you can give him a number. But the problem is you can't because 1, he exists above numbers, and 2, he's interacting with the narrative, which you can't give a number to the narrative because the narrative scales above quantifiable numbers in general, right? And then besides that, there's also DC Cosmology, which puts casts incredibly high into the verse. Like, we're looking at around Overvoid tier. He's insane. Like, he scales the characters like Mandrak. It's honestly crazy, right? So, DBZ Mackie, you cannot give characters like Cass or any other character in general that do not go by numbers. You cannot give them numbers, right? You can debate me on this. Come join my Discord server. I don't care. And also, for your Dragon Ball weakest to strongest villains, that video is also awful, alright? And this reason is because in Dragon Ball, you don't go by Super Saiyan tiers. You don't, alright? Like, just because Super Saiyan Goku fought against Hit in the Super manga, but then struggled against Kid Buu and as a Super Saiyan 3 does not put Kid Buu above Hit. That is not true in the slightest. Like, your Super Saiyan tier list, or based off how strong the villains are, based off the Super Saiyan tier list, is flawed, and you do not go by that. Like, that is inherently faulty, and you just do not go by numbers for everything in the verse. And you don't go for tier systems when different verses do not go by tier systems, right? If you want to debate me on it, hit up my comment section. If you want to debate me on it, okay, come join my Discord, or I will come join your Discord, and we can debate about it, but it will be recorded. Someone can either screen record it, pull a Discord bot, I don't care, right? But it will be recorded, and I will be uploading it if we do debate. Except it will be on my main channel, not the debate channel. Because I do not believe your content is very good at all. I think it's lazy, and I think it is dishonest, and it is misinformative. If you want to debate me on that, do it. But anyway, so that's an example of a debunk on DBZ Mackie being able to give numbers to casts or say My Hero. And by the way, for My Hero Academia doesn't go by a number basis. It's not 7 Deadly Sins where you can give numbers to say Escanor or say Meliodas to describe how strong they are at the strongest or at the weakest. Not every verse goes by 7 Deadly Sins logic, just like not every verse goes by Dragon Ball logic. But anyway, so those are examples of debunks. I hope you found this video informative. Like, go send this to DBZ Mackie if you do not like him, because I will debate him if you want. But anyway, so hope you guys have a good day. I'm nothing important here, and ciao.